Hey everyone. Before we dive into today's story, I need you to do something for me. Look around your room right now. Everything seems solid, right? Real. But what if I told you that in 1943 the United States Navy might have accidentally proven that reality itself is far more fragile than we think? That they made an entire warship, and everyone on it, disappear into thin air? This is the story of the Philadelphia experiment. And I have to warn you, the deeper we go, the stranger this gets. It's October 28, 1943. World War II is raging across two oceans. In the Philadelphia Naval Shipyard, something unprecedented is about to happen. According to the legend, a destroyer escort called the USS Eldridge is about to become the centerpiece of the most ambitious and horrifying military experiment ever conducted. The goal, to make the ship invisible to enemy radar. The result? Well, that's where things get complicated. Because if even half of what supposedly happened that day is true, then the U.S. Navy didn't just make a ship invisible. They accidentally ripped a hole in the fabric of reality itself. And the sailors aboard that ship paid a price that's almost too terrible to imagine. But here's what makes this story so fascinating. It's not just some campfire tale. There are names, dates, locations. There are people who've sworn under oath that they witnessed it. And there are government documents that, well, raise more questions than they answer. So let's start at the beginning. Let's talk about what the Philadelphia experiment was supposed to be. In the early 1940s, the Allies had a serious problem. German U-boats were devastating supply convoys crossing the Atlantic. These submarines were incredibly hard to detect, and they were winning the underwater war. The U.S. military was desperate for any technological edge they could get. Now, around this same time, there was brilliant theoretical work being done on electromagnetic fields. Scientists understood that powerful magnetic fields could, in theory, bend light around an object. And if you could bend light around something, you could make it invisible, at least to the human eye. But the military wasn't interested in hiding things from human eyes. They wanted to hide ships from radar. And radar, as you probably know, uses electromagnetic waves. So the thinking went, if we could create a powerful enough electromagnetic field around a ship, we could bend those radar waves around it. The ship would vanish from enemy detection. This wasn't entirely science fiction. The British had already been experimenting with something called degaussing, using electromagnetic fields to protect ships from magnetic mines. So the basic technology existed. The question was, could you scale it up? Enter the USS Eldridge, a newly commissioned destroyer escort, hull number DE-183, about 300 feet long, built for submarine warfare. And according to the legend, it became the test subject for something called Project Rainbow. The story goes that scientists installed massive electromagnetic generators on the ship. These would create an incredibly powerful field that would envelop the entire vessel. And on that October day in 1943, with a full crew aboard, they decided to flip the switch. Here's where eyewitness accounts come in. And I want to be clear, these are disputed, controversial, and many people think they're completely fabricated. But they're also deeply specific and disturbingly consistent. According to these accounts, when the generators reached full power, something impossible happened. The USS Eldridge began to glow. A greenish fog surrounded the ship, getting thicker and brighter. Witnesses on shore said they could feel a strange pressure in the air, an electric sensation that made their hair stand on end. And then, in an instant, the ship vanished, not just from radar, completely, visually. The 1,240-ton destroyer escort simply ceased to exist in the Philadelphia Naval Shipyard. But it gets weirder, because according to these same accounts, the USS Eldridge didn't just turn invisible, it teleported. For several minutes, the ship allegedly appeared over 200 miles away, in Norfolk, Virginia. Multiple witnesses in Norfolk Harbor supposedly saw the Eldridge materialize, stay visible for a few minutes, and then vanish again. Moments later, back in Philadelphia, the ship reappeared. Now, if this story ended there, it would already be one of the strangest military incidents in history. But the truly horrifying part isn't what happened to the ship. It's what happened to the men on board. When the USS Eldridge rematerialized in Philadelphia, the crew was in chaos. Some sailors were violently ill, vomiting uncontrollably. Others were disoriented, speaking incoherently. But the worst cases, the ones that still haunt this legend, were far more disturbing. According to the accounts, some crew members had been fused with the metal structure of the ship itself. Their bodies were embedded in the bulkheads, the deck, the equipment. They were alive, conscious, screaming. Imagine the horror. Your hand melded into steel, your legs disappearing into the floor, your body molecularly bonded with the ship you'd been standing on. Other sailors had allegedly gone completely insane, their minds shattered by whatever they'd experienced during those moments of teleportation. Some spoke of seeing other dimensions, of being in two places at once, of experiencing time moving in impossible ways. And then there were the sailors who had supposedly vanished entirely, just gone, never found, as if they'd been scattered across space and time, lost in whatever impossible realm the ship had briefly entered. The Navy, according to the legend, immediately shut down the experiment. The ship was quickly sailed away. The remaining crew members were given discharges, often on psychological grounds, and everyone involved was sworn to absolute secrecy. Project Rainbow, if it had ever existed, was buried deep. So that's the story. Absolutely wild, right? But here's the thing. Stories like this don't come from nowhere. So where did this legend actually originate? The answer is a man named Carlos Miguel Allende, though he sometimes went by Carl Allen. In 1955, more than a decade after the supposed experiment, Allende wrote a series of bizarre letters to a UFO researcher named Morris K. Jessup. Jessup had written a book about UFOs and anti-gravity, and Allende claimed to have information about a secret Navy experiment that proved these technologies were real. He said he'd been serving on a nearby merchant ship, the SS Andrew Furuseth, and had witnessed the Eldridge disappear and reappear. Allende's letters were strange. They were written in different colored inks, with erratic capitalization and underlining. He made grand claims, but provided few verifiable details. And when researchers tried to track him down or verify his story, things got murky fast. But here's where it gets interesting. Jessup received these letters, filed them away as probably nonsense, and moved on with his life. Except that a few years later, in 1957, Jessup was contacted by the Office of Naval Research. The ONR told Jessup that they'd received a copy of his book, annotated extensively with handwritten notes in the margins. These notes seemed to be written by multiple people who had intimate knowledge of UFOs, alien technology, and secret military experiments. And the style of the annotations was similar to Allende's letters. The Navy was interested enough that they actually made copies of this annotated book. They even published a limited run of the Varro edition, named after the contractor who manufactured it. Why would the Navy go to this trouble over what appeared to be the ravings of conspiracy theorists? That question has never been fully answered. Now, before we go further, let's talk about what we can actually verify. The USS Eldridge was a real ship. That's confirmed. It was commissioned in August 1943 and served throughout the war. But here's the problem. Naval records show that the Eldridge wasn't even in Philadelphia on October 28, 1943. According to official documents, it was in the Bahamas at the time, on a shakedown cruise. Moreover, there's no record of any Project Rainbow in the Navy archives, no documentation of electromagnetic invisibility experiments, no reports of crew members being injured or going insane in the way the legend describes. The Navy has repeatedly denied that any such experiment took place. In 1996, the Office of Naval Research issued a statement saying, ONR has never conducted investigations on radar invisibility, either in 1943 or at any other time. So case closed, right? Just a hoax, a legend, a story that got out of hand. Well, not quite, because there are some genuinely strange coincidences and unexplained elements that keep this story alive. First, the Navy was absolutely conducting electromagnetic research during World War II. Degaussing was real. They were experimenting with ways to protect ships from magnetic mines and improve radar technology. So the basic premise that they were working with powerful electromagnetic fields isn't far-fetched. Second, there were experiments being done on radar invisibility. Not on full-sized ships with crews, but in laboratories. Scientists were exploring how electromagnetic fields might affect radar detection. Some of this work remained classified for decades. Third, and this is the weird one, Morris K. Jessup, the UFO researcher who received Allende's letters, died in 1959 under circumstances that many found suspicious. He was found in his car, in a Florida park, with a hose running from the exhaust pipe into the vehicle. It was ruled a suicide. But Jessup's friends said he'd been working on something big, that he'd seemed excited rather than depressed. Some people believe he'd gotten too close to something the government wanted to keep hidden. Now, I'm not saying that proves anything. Correlation isn't causation, and people tragically take their own lives for reasons their friends might not understand. But it's one of those details that conspiracy theorists point to. And then there's the question of the witnesses. Over the years, several people have come forward, claiming to have been involved or to have knowledge of the experiment. Most have been debunked or found to be unreliable. But a few, a small few, have maintained their stories consistently and have resisted all attempts to discredit them. Let's talk about the science for a minute. Could any of this actually be possible? Well, making a ship invisible to radar, that's not only possible, it's been done. Modern stealth technology uses carefully designed surfaces and materials to scatter and absorb radar waves. The F-117 Nighthawk stealth fighter entered service in the 1980s, and it's essentially invisible to most radar systems. But that's using geometry and special coatings, not electromagnetic fields. Could powerful electromagnets actually bend radar waves around an object? In theory, yes. Scientists today work with materials called metamaterials that can bend electromagnetic radiation in unusual ways. But the power requirements would be enormous, and the technology in 1943 was nowhere near sophisticated enough. As for teleportation, that's where we leave the realm of plausible science and enter pure speculation. Quantum teleportation is a real thing. Scientists have successfully teleported quantum states between particles. But we're talking about subatomic particles over short distances, not a 100-ton warship across 200 miles. For a ship to physically teleport, you'd need to either move it faster than light, impossible according to our current understanding of physics, or create some kind of wormhole or manipulation of space-time. And that requires the kind of energy that, well, let's just say the entire electrical output of the United States in 1943 wouldn't come close. But here's the thing about impossible physics. We keep discovering that things we thought were impossible actually aren't. 100 years ago, nuclear power was fantasy. 50 years ago, quantum computing was theoretical. Who knows what might be possible that we simply don't understand yet? And that's what makes stories like the Philadelphia experiment so tantalizing. They sit right on that border between the impossible and the maybe someday possible. So what do I think happened? What's my take on all this? Honestly, the most likely explanation is that Carlos Allende made the whole thing up. Maybe he saw the USS Eldridge at some point, mixed in some half-understood science, added dramatic flair, and created a compelling story. People do this, sometimes for attention, sometimes because they genuinely believe their own confused memories, sometimes just for fun. The Philadelphia experiment has all the hallmarks of a modern myth, just enough real elements to seem plausible, dramatic stakes, government secrecy, tragic consequences, and no definitive proof either way. But, and this is a big but, the fact that it's probably not true doesn't mean nothing happened. Stay with me here. The Navy was conducting electromagnetic experiments. They were working on radar technology, on degaussing, on all sorts of classified projects. It's entirely possible that there was some kind of accident, some kind of experiment that went wrong, something that got covered up not because it violated the laws of physics, but because it violated safety protocols or resulted in unnecessary casualties. Military experiments have gone wrong before. Sailors have been injured in accidents that were then classified. The government has absolutely covered up embarrassing incidents to protect its reputation or ongoing programs. So maybe the real Philadelphia experiment wasn't about teleportation at all. Maybe it was a more mundane tragedy, electrical accidents, electromagnetic fields strong enough to cause disorientation or injury, a botched test that hurt people. And maybe that kernel of truth got embellished, exaggerated, and transformed into the legend we know today. Or maybe, just maybe, on one day in 1943, some scientists tried something that shouldn't have worked. And for a few terrifying moments, it did. Here's what I find most interesting about this whole story. It's not really about whether a ship teleported or not. It's about what we're willing to believe is possible. The Philadelphia experiment has persisted for 80 years because it taps into something deep in the human psyche. We want to believe that reality is stranger than we think. We want to believe that there are secrets out there, just beyond our understanding. We want to believe that the government knows things we don't, has access to technologies that would blow our minds. And you know what? Sometimes that's actually true. The Manhattan Project was real. Area 51 is real. The government does conduct classified experiments. They do have technologies that seem like science fiction to ordinary people. So the question isn't really, did the Philadelphia experiment happen exactly as described? The question is, what don't we know? What's happening right now in some classified facility that we won't learn about for 50 years? Because I promise you, there's something. There always is. The USS Eldridge, by the way, had a long life after 1943. It served throughout World War II without any reported incidents. After the war, it was sold to Greece in 1951, where it served in their navy as the Leon until it was scrapped in 1999. Navy veterans who served on the Eldridge in later years often said they'd get asked about the Philadelphia experiment.